You are going to the north." The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples of silence that spread through the council chamber. Isla felt her breath catch in her throat, her fingers gripping the rough wooden edge of the table before her. She had known this moment would come eventually. Ever since the treaty negotiations began, ever since whispers of a sacrifice had started circulating through the Silverpine Pack, she had felt the weight of inevitable doom settling over her. Shoulders like a shroud. But knowing something and hearing it spoken aloud were two entirely different things. Her father, Alpha Marcus of Silverpine, would not meet her eyes. He stood at the head of the long table, his broad shoulders rigid, his jaw set in that familiar expression of cold determination that had defined every interaction they had shared for the past 22 years of her life. Around him, the council members shifted in their seats, some looking uncomfortable, others openly satisfied. Isla recognized the gleam of vindication in Elder Thomas's pale eyes, the barely concealed smirk on Beta Simon's weathered face. They had always viewed her as a burden, a stain on the Pack's reputation. An Alpha's daughter without a wolf was worse than an Omega. At least Omegas could shift, could contribute to the Pack's strength. She was nothing. Less than nothing. The Beast of the North has agreed to accept one of our own as a gesture of goodwill. Her father continued, his voice carrying the formal cadence he used for Pack announcements. In exchange, he will cease the border raids and guarantee safe passage for our traders through the Northern Pass. The terms are more than generous considering our position. Isla wanted to laugh at that. Generous. They were sending her to die, and they called it generous. Everyone knew the stories about the Alpha King of the North, Kale the Merciless, the Demon Wolf, the Beast. He had not been seen in his human form in over 5 years. Some said longer. He ruled his kingdom from the shadows, appearing only as a massive black wolf of unnatural size, with eyes that glowed like molten gold, and a presence that made even the strongest alphas tremble. Those who entered his territory rarely returned, and those who did spoke in hushed, terrified whispers of a monster that had lost all traces of humanity, and now she was being sent to him like a lamb to slaughter. "I will go." Isla heard her own voice, steady and clear, cutting through the heavy silence. What else could she say? Beg for mercy from people who had never shown her any? Plead with a father who looked at her with barely disguised disappointment every single day? She had learned long ago that dignity was the only thing she could control, the only armor she had against a world that had decided she was worthless before she had even had a chance to prove otherwise. Her father's eyes finally met hers, and for just a moment, she thought she saw something flicker there. Regret, perhaps. Or maybe just relief that she was making this easy for him. "You will leave at first light," he said. "Take whatever belongings you need. The journey to the Northern Kingdom takes 3 days by wagon. 3 days. 3 days to say goodbye to the only life she had ever known, even if that life had been filled with loneliness and rejection. 3 days before she faced whatever horror awaited her in the frozen mountains of the north. That night, Isla stood at her window, looking out over the Silverpine territory. The moon hung heavy and full above the forest, bathing everything in silver light. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the Pack's nightly run, the howls of her people rising into the sky in a chorus of wild joy and primal connection. She had never been part of that, had never felt the change that every werewolf was supposed to experience by their 16th birthday at the latest. The healers had examined her countless times, searching for some explanation, some cure. They found nothing. No blockage, no curse, no physical ailment. Her wolf simply did not exist, or if it did, it remained buried so deep that not even the full moon could call it forth. Her mother had died giving birth to her, a fact that Elder Thomas never let her forget. "Your mother was strong," he had told her once, his voice dripping with accusation. "She survived 3 other births without difficulty. But you took everything from her. Perhaps that is why you have nothing to give in return. Isla had been 12 years old when he said that. She had cried herself to sleep that night, and many nights after. But eventually, the tears dried up. Eventually, she learned to build walls around her heart, to protect the tender parts of herself from the constant barrage of cruelty disguised as concern. The wagon arrived before dawn, a sturdy thing pulled by 2 massive draft horses. The driver was a grizzled man named Garrett, who had served as a trader between territories for decades. He helped Isla load her single trunk of belongings with gentle efficiency, his eyes kind, even if he said little. As the first rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, Isla took one last look at the pack house where she had grown up. No one had come to see her off. Not her father, not her half-siblings, not even the Omega servants who had sometimes shown her small kindnesses when no one else was watching. She was leaving as she had lived, alone and unremembered. "Ready, miss?" Garrett asked, his rough voice surprisingly gentle. Isla nodded, climbing into the wagon beside him. As the horses began to move, pulling them away from Silverpine territory and toward the unknown, she felt something strange settle in her chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps its distant cousin. If she was going to die, at least it would be somewhere new. At least her last days would not be spent watching people pretend she did not exist. The journey north was both longer and shorter than Isla had expected. They traveled through dense forests that gradually gave way to rocky terrain, the temperature dropping steadily with each mile they covered. Garrett proved to be a comfortable companion, sharing stories of his travels when the silence grew too heavy, but never pressing her to talk when she preferred to lose herself in her own thoughts. On the second night, as they made camp beside a small stream, he finally addressed what they had both been carefully avoiding. "You know, the stories are probably exaggerated," he said, stirring the fire with a long stick. "About the Northern King. In my experience, legends always grow bigger in the telling." Isla appreciated the attempt at comfort, even if she did not quite believe it. "Have you been to the Northern Kingdom before?" she asked. Garrett nodded slowly, his weathered face thoughtful in the firelight. "Twice. Delivered grain shipments during the harsh winter 3 years back, and again last spring with medicine supplies. Never saw the king himself, mind you. But the people there, they are not what you would expect. Disciplined, yes. A bit cold and formal, perhaps, but not cruel. Not monsters." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "The castle is something to see, though. Built into the mountain itself, all black stone and ice, like something from the old stories. On the third day, they began to climb. The road wound upward through mountain passes that grew increasingly narrow and treacherous. Snow appeared on the ground, despite it being late spring in the south, a reminder that the north lived by different rules, followed different seasons. And then, as they rounded a particularly sharp bend, Isla saw it. The northern castle rose before them like a dark crown against the white peaks, exactly as Garrett had described. Black stone towers pierced the sky, their surfaces gleaming with ice that caught and reflected the weak sunlight. Massive walls surrounded the structure, and Isla could see guards posted at regular intervals, their forms dark against the snow. It was beautiful in a terrible, awe-inspiring way. Beautiful like a blade or a winter storm. Beautiful and deadly. As they approached the main gates, Isla became aware of eyes watching them. Guards in black and silver armor, their faces impassive, tracked their progress with the focused attention of predators assessing potential prey. The gates opened without any visible signal, and they entered a courtyard that took Isla's breath away despite her best efforts to remain unaffected. The courtyard was enormous, easily large enough to hold her entire pack 3 times over. The ground was paved with smooth black stone that had been cleared of snow, revealing intricate patterns of silver inlay that formed the shape of a massive wolf mid-leap. Buildings surrounded the space on three sides, their architecture severe but elegant, all sharp angles and tall windows. And at the far end, a grand staircase led up to the entrance of the main castle, its doors easily 20 feet tall and carved with scenes of wolves running beneath a full moon. "We are here, miss," Garrett said quietly, bringing the wagon to a halt near the base of the stairs. Before Isla could respond, the massive doors at the top of the staircase opened, and a woman descended toward them. She was tall and striking, with black hair pulled back in a severe style and eyes the color of ice. She wore a long gown of deep purple that swept the ground. As she walked, and her posture radiated authority and barely concealed contempt. "You must be the offering from Silverpine," the woman said, her voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. She did not phrase it as a question. "I am Lady Morgana, first advisor to His Majesty. You will come with me." Isla climbed down from the wagon, her legs unsteady after 3 days of travel. She turned to thank Garrett, but he was already being led away by a stable hand, the wagon and horses disappearing toward what she assumed were the service buildings. Just like that, her last connection to her old life was gone. "Follow me," Lady Morgana commanded, already turning back toward the stairs. "His Majesty does not appreciate being kept waiting." Isla hurried after her, trying not to slip on the ice-slicked steps. As they passed through the enormous doors, she found herself in an entrance hall that defied imagination. The ceiling soared at least 50 feet above her head, supported by columns, carved to look like ancient trees. Tapestries depicting epic battles and crowned wolves hung between the columns, and the floor was polished stone that reflected everything like dark water. But what caught Isla's attention most was the cold. It was not just the temperature, though the hall was certainly frigid despite the massive fireplaces burning at either end. It was a deeper cold, something that seemed to emanate from the very stones themselves, a chill that spoke of isolation and ancient sorrow. "The king will see you now," Lady Morgana said, stopping before a set of double doors made of dark wood bound with silver. "A word of advice, girl. Do not look directly at him. Do not speak unless spoken to. And do not, under any circumstances, show fear. He can sense it, and it only makes things worse." Before Isla could ask what things she meant, the doors swung open, revealing a throne room beyond. The throne room was vast and dimly lit, with windows high on the walls letting in slanted beams of pale sunlight that did little to warm the space. Torches burned in iron sconces along the walls, their flames casting dancing shadows across the floor. And at the far end of the room, on a raised dais, sat the throne itself. It was carved from a single massive piece of black stone, its back shaped like a wolf's head, with jaws open in a silent howl. But the throne was empty. Instead, lying before it on the cold stone floor, was the wolf. Isla's breath caught in her throat. Nothing could have prepared her for the reality of him. The beast of the north was enormous, easily the size of a full-grown horse, perhaps larger. His fur was black as a moonless night, thick and glossy even in the dim light. But it was his eyes that truly captured her attention. Molten gold. Exactly as the stories said. But there was something in them that the stories had never mentioned. Intelligence, yes, and power that made the air feel heavy. But also something else. Something that looked almost like pain. The wolf's massive head turned toward her as Lady Morgana led her forward, those golden eyes fixing on her with an intensity that made her feel transparent, as if he could see straight through to her bones. Isla felt her heart hammering in her chest, felt every instinct screaming at her to run, to flee from this apex predator that could tear her apart with a single swipe of his enormous paw. But she did not run. Instead, she found herself doing something that surprised even her. She met his gaze. Lady Morgana's sharp intake of breath told Isla she had made a mistake, broken some crucial protocol, but she could not look away. There was something in those golden eyes, something that called to a part of her she had not known existed. A recognition, perhaps, or a question. "Kneel," Lady Morgana hissed beside her, her fingers digging into Isla's arm with bruising force. "Kneel before your king, you foolish girl." Isla's legs folded, her knees hitting the cold stone with a sharp jolt of pain. She bowed her head, her heart still racing, but she could feel him still watching her, could feel the weight of his attention like a physical thing pressing down on her shoulders. "Your Majesty," Lady Morgana said, her voice taking on a smooth, almost oily quality. "The offering from Silverpine Pack, as agreed upon in the treaty. Her name is Isla, daughter of Alpha Marcus. She is, as you can see, quite ordinary. No wolf, no notable abilities. But she is young and healthy, and she has been instructed to serve however you see fit." The word stung, even though Isla had expected nothing less. Ordinary, wolfless, worthless, the same labels that had followed her all her life. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, watching a small crack in the stone spread out before her, like a frozen river. She heard movement, the soft sound of enormous paws against stone. The wolf was approaching. Isla forced herself to remain still, forced herself to breathe evenly, even as every nerve in her body screamed danger. Closer, closer. And then he was right in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his massive body, could smell earth and pine and something wild that made her head spin. She could see his paws now, each one larger than her head, tipped with claws that looked like they could shred steel. One swipe. That was all it would take to end her. Part of her wondered if that might not be a mercy. But then something impossible happened. The wolf lowered his enormous head, bringing his face level with hers. She could feel his breath, hot against her cheek, could see the individual hairs of his muzzle, streaked here and there with silver. And then, very deliberately, he inhaled. He was scenting her, she realized. Learning her smell, cataloging her presence. It should have been terrifying. It was terrifying. But underneath the terror, Isla felt something else stirring. A strange warmth in her chest, a pull she had never experienced before. Her hand moved before she could think about what she was doing. Moved of its own accord, rising from her lap, extending toward the massive wolf before her. "No!" Lady Morgana's shout came too late. Isla's fingers made contact with the wolf's fur. The moment her skin touched him, the world exploded into sensation. Heat and cold, power and gentleness, rage and sorrow all crashed through her in a wave that stole the breath from her lungs. Images flashed behind her eyes, fragments of memory that were not her own. A young man with dark hair and golden eyes, laughing in the sunlight. The same man, older, standing over a battlefield strewn with bodies, his face a mask of grief. Betrayal. A woman with red hair and cruel eyes, whispering words in a language Isla did not recognize. Pain. Such terrible pain. Bones breaking and reforming. A scream that had no end. And then darkness. Endless, suffocating darkness. And the loss of something precious. His humanity. His hope. His ability to return he had been born to. Isla gasped, her hand still pressed against the wolf's fur, her whole body trembling with the force of what she was experiencing. She could feel him in her mind, in her heart, in her very soul. Could feel his surprise, his shock at this impossible connection. No one should be able to touch him like this. No one should be able to see inside him, to feel what he felt. But she could. And more than that, he could feel her too. She knew it with absolute certainty. Could sense his presence in her own mind, careful and wondering, exploring this bridge that had formed between them with the tentative touch of someone who had forgotten what connection felt like. The wolf made a sound, something between a whine and a growl, confusion evident in the rumble, And then, slowly, impossibly, the massive creature's front legs bent, his head lowered further, and the beast of the north, the demon wolf, the creature that had made armies tremble, knelt before her. The throne room erupted into chaos. Lady Morgana was shouting something, her voice shrill with alarm. Guards rushed forward, their weapons drawn, clearly not knowing whether to defend their king or attack Isla. But Isla barely registered any of it. She was lost in the golden eyes before her, in the connection that thrummed between them like a living thing, in the absolute certainty that her life had just changed in ways she could not begin to comprehend. Impossible, Lady Morgana was saying, her face pale, her composure finally cracking. This is impossible. She is nothing. She has no wolf, no power. This cannot be happening. But it was happening. And as Isla knelt there on the cold stone floor with her hand still resting on the wolf's dark fur, she felt something shift deep inside her chest. Something that had been sleeping for her entire life stirred, stretched, opened eyes that had never seen light before. A voice that was hers but not hers whispered through her mind. Finally, it said, "We have been waiting for you." If you are enjoying this story, do not forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. The guards were ushered back by a gesture from Lady Morgana, though their hands remained on their weapons. Their eyes locked on Isla, with a mixture of fear and suspicion. The wolf, the king, remained kneeling before her, his golden gaze never leaving her face. Isla could still feel the connection between them, a golden thread. That seemed to tie her heart to his, pulsing with warmth and light, and something that felt almost like recognition. "Explain yourself," Lady Morgana demanded, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "What witchcraft is this? What have you done to His Majesty?" Isla pulled her hand back slowly, the loss of contact making her feel suddenly cold and bereft. The wolf's eyes tracked the movement, and she could have sworn she saw something like regret flash through them. "I do not know," Isla said honestly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I did not do anything. I just touched him. And then I felt—" She trailed off, not knowing how to put into words what she had experienced. How could she explain that for just a moment she had seen into the soul of this ancient, powerful being? That she had felt his loneliness, his rage, his desperate, clinging hope that somewhere, somehow, there might be an end to his curse. Lady Morgana's eyes narrowed, studying Isla with an intensity that made her want to shrink back. "Guards," the advisor said sharply. "Take her to the East Tower. Lock her in until we can determine what manner of creature she truly is. If she is some kind of spy, some weapon sent by our enemies to harm the king." No. The word came not from Isla, but from the wolf himself. Or rather, not a word exactly, but a growl so deep and commanding that it seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the castle. Every person in the throne room froze. The wolf stood, his massive form rising to its full, imposing height. He moved between Isla and the guards, his body language unmistakably protective. Lady Morgana's face went through a series of expressions, shock and anger and calculation all flashing across her features in rapid succession. "Your Majesty," she began, her tone carefully controlled. "Surely you cannot mean to protect this girl. We know nothing about her. She could be dangerous." The wolf's response was another low growl, this one laced with warning. His tail, thick as a tree trunk, swept across the floor in clear agitation. Lady Morgana took a step back, though whether from fear or strategic retreat, Isla could not tell. "As you wish, Your Majesty," the advisor said finally, inclining her head in a bow that somehow managed to convey displeasure. "Shall I have chambers prepared for our guest in the main wing?" The wolf turned his head to look at Isla, and she found herself once again caught in that golden gaze. She could feel something from him, an emotion she could not quite name, transmitted through that strange connection they shared. A question, perhaps, or a request. Without understanding how she knew, Isla understood what he wanted. He wanted her to stay close, wanted her where he could sense her, protect her, understand what had just happened between them. Yes, Isla heard herself say, answering a question no one else could hear. I will stay. The wolf's eyes seemed to brighten, just for a moment, and Isla felt warmth bloom in her chest again. That strange, wonderful sensation of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in her life. Lady Morgana clapped her hands sharply, and servants appeared from doorways Isla had not noticed. Prepare the rose chamber, she commanded. See that it is cleaned and warmed. Our guest will be staying in the family wing. The way she said guest made it clear she meant prisoner, but Isla did not care. She was too busy trying to process everything that had happened. In the last few minutes, the connection, the kneeling, the voice in her head that had claimed to be waiting. What was happening to her? As the servants hurried to obey Lady Morgana's orders, the wolf moved back toward his throne, but he did not take his place upon it. Instead, he lay down before it, his massive body at rest, but his eyes still fixed on Isla, watching, guarding, waiting. Come, Lady Morgana said coldly, gripping Isla's arm once more. I will show you to your rooms, and then you and I are going to have a very long conversation about exactly who and what you are. As Isla was led from the throne room, she cast one last look over her shoulder. The wolf had not moved, but his golden eyes followed her every step, and she could still feel that thread connecting them, stretching but not breaking as the distance between them grew. She did not know what any of this meant, did not understand the voice in her head or the power she had felt coursing through her when she touched him. But she knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. And for the first time in her life, that thought did not fill her with dread. It filled her with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The rose chamber turned out to be a beautiful room in the castle's eastern wing, all pale stone walls and tall windows that looked out over the mountain peaks. A fire had been lit in the massive fireplace, and servants had filled the room with warm furs and soft linens. Fresh flowers sat in crystal vases on various surfaces, roses in shades of white and palest pink that filled the air with delicate perfume. It should have been welcoming. Instead, it felt like a beautiful cage. Lady Morgana dismissed the servants with a sharp gesture, then turned to face Isla, her ice-blue eyes cold and assessing. Sit, she commanded, indicating a chair near the fire. Isla sat, more because her legs felt weak than from any desire to obey. The events of the last hour had drained her in ways she had not expected, and she could feel exhaustion pulling at her limbs. Now, Lady Morgana said, remaining standing, looming over Isla in a clear power play. You are going to tell me everything. Every detail of your life, your family, your pack. And most importantly, you are going to tell me how you managed to create that connection with His Majesty. Isla met the woman's gaze steadily, drawing on reserves of courage she had not known she possessed. I already told you. I do not know how it happened. I touched him, and then I felt something, like a bond forming between us. Impossible, Lady Morgana snapped, beginning to pace the room like a caged predator. The king has been examined by every powerful witch, every gifted healer, every wise woman in the Northern Territories. His curse is absolute. He cannot shift to human form, cannot communicate except through the most basic of gestures, cannot form mind links even with his own pack. And yet you, a wolfless nobody from a minor southern pack, claim you can feel him, can connect with him? The contempt in her voice was palpable. Perhaps you are lying. Perhaps this is all some elaborate scheme cooked up by your father to gain advantage in the treaty negotiations. Isla felt a spark of anger ignite in her chest. My father barely acknowledges my existence, she said, her voice sharper than she had intended. He sent me here to die because I am an embarrassment to him. Trust me, Lady Morgana. I am no one spy. I am just trying to survive. Something flickered in Lady Morgana's eyes, something that might have been surprise or reassessment. Tell me about your mother, she said abruptly, changing tactics. What was her name? What bloodline did she come from? Isla blinked at the unexpected question. My mother's name was Elena. She died giving birth to me. I do not know much about her bloodline. My father never spoke of it. Elena, Lady Morgana repeated, her brow furrowing. And her pack. Name before she mated your father. I do not know, Isla admitted. My father destroyed all records of her after she died. I think it hurt him too much to remember her. That, at least, was what the Omega servants had told her in whispered conversations when she was a child. That Alpha Marcus had loved his mate so fiercely that her death had broken something inside him. That he could not look at Isla without seeing the woman he had lost. Lady Morgana was silent for a long moment, her expression distant, as if calculating something. Finally, she spoke. Get some rest, she said, moving toward the door. You will not be permitted to leave this room without an escort. Meals will be brought to you, and you will not, under any circumstances, attempt to see His Majesty without my express permission. Do you understand? Isla nodded, too tired to argue. Lady Morgana paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression Isla could not quite read. Whatever you think you felt in that throne room, the advisor said softly, do not let it give you false hope. The king's curse has consumed greater women than you. It would be wise to remember that you are only here because your pack considered you disposable. The words landed like physical blows, but Isla refused to let them show on her face. She simply met Lady Morgana's gaze until the woman turned and swept from the room, the door closing behind her with an ominous finality. Alone at last, Isla sank back into the chair, her entire body trembling with delayed reaction. What had she gotten herself into? She thought back to that moment in the throne room, to the feeling of the wolf's fur under her palm, to the rush of images and emotions that had flooded through her. It had been real. She knew it had been real. But what did it mean? And why had the wolf knelt for her? She stood and moved to the window, looking out over the snow-covered mountains. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible in this frozen landscape. Somewhere in this massive castle, the wolf was alone. She could still feel him, she realized with a start. Could still sense that golden thread connecting them. Faint, but undeniable. Was he thinking of her too? Did he wonder about the girl who had somehow breached his isolation? Isla pressed her hand against the cold glass, her breath fogging the surface. I do not understand any of this, she whispered to her own reflection. But I will figure it out. I have to. Because for the first time in her life, she had felt something other than rejection when someone looked at her. When the wolf's golden eyes had met hers, she had not seen disappointment or disgust. She had seen recognition, understanding, a connection that defied explanation but felt more real than anything she had ever experienced. And she was not going to let Lady Morgana's warnings or her own fear take that away from her. The days that followed fell into a strange routine. Isla was confined to the rose chamber and the small adjoining sitting room, with servants bringing her meals and tending to her needs but never speaking beyond the barest courtesies. She tried to engage them in conversation, desperate for any information about the castle, the king, the curse that bound him. But they avoided her questions with practiced skill, their faces carefully blank whenever she asked about anything of substance. Lady Morgana visited each morning, subjecting Isla to lengthy interrogations about her past, her family, anything that might explain the connection she had formed with the king. Isla answered as honestly as she could, but she could tell the advisor did not believe her. How could she, when Isla herself barely understood what had happened? On the third night of her confinement, Isla woke to find moonlight streaming through her window. She had been dreaming of running through a forest, of powerful muscles propelling her forward, of the wind rushing through. Fur she did not have. The dream had been so vivid that waking felt like a loss, like being torn away from something essential. She sat up in bed, her heart racing, and that was when she felt it. A pull, strong and insistent, tugging at that golden thread that connected her to the wolf. He was calling to her. Somehow across the distance of the castle, through stone walls and locked doors, he was reaching out to her through their bond. Isla slipped from her bed, pulling a thick robe over her. Nightgown. The door to her chamber was locked from the outside. She had tested it several times. But the door to the sitting room remained open, and that room had a second door that led to a servants' corridor. She had watched the maids use it when they brought her meals. Moving as quietly as she could, Isla tried the servants' door. It opened easily, revealing a narrow hallway lit by torches set in iron sconces. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping through. The pull was stronger now, a physical sensation in her chest that urged her forward. She followed it like a compass, letting it guide her through the maze of corridors. Several times she had to duck into alcoves or side passages to avoid guards, her heart pounding as they passed mere feet from her hiding place. But somehow she remained undiscovered, as if the shadows themselves were helping to conceal her. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, Isla found herself standing before a set of heavy, double doors. The pull thrummed through her entire body now, so strong it almost hurt. He was beyond those doors. She knew it with absolute certainty. The doors were not locked. They swung open at her touch, revealing a massive chamber that stole her breath away. It was a bedroom, clearly, but unlike any bedroom Isla had ever seen. The ceiling soared high above, supported by carved pillars. A fireplace large enough to stand in blazed along one wall, and windows twice her height lined another, offering a view of the mountains and the star-strewn sky beyond. But what dominated the space was the bed. It was enormous, easily large enough to fit 6 people, draped with furs and rich fabrics in shades of midnight blue and silver. And lying in the center of that vast bed, looking somehow both majestic and desperately lonely, was the wolf. His golden eyes fixed on her the moment she entered, and Isla felt the connection between them surge with recognition and something that felt almost like relief. "Hi," she whispered, suddenly feeling foolish. "What did you say to a cursed king who could not speak, who had somehow called you to him across the castle?" The wolf's ears pricked forward, his massive head tilting slightly as if listening to her with an intensity that went beyond physical hearing. Slowly, carefully, he rose from the bed and padded toward her. Each step was measured, controlled, as if he was trying not to frighten her, as if a creature that could tear her apart with barely any effort was worried about making her afraid. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could reach out and touch him if she chose, but far enough to give her space. Waiting. Always waiting for her to make the choice. Isla found herself smiling, despite the strangeness of the situation. "You called me, did you not?" she said softly. "I felt you pulling at our connection. I could not ignore it." The wolf made a sound, a soft chuff that might have been agreement or surprise. He lowered himself to the ground, bringing his head level with hers, those golden eyes searching her face. Isla took a step forward, then another, until she was close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his dark fur. "May I?" she asked, extending her hand. The wolf's response was to shift his weight, pressing his head gently against her palm. The moment they touched, that flood of sensation returned, but this time Isla was more prepared for it. She opened herself to it, let it wash through her without resistance. And in doing so, she began to understand. The curse was not just a physical binding. It was layered, complex, woven through with dark magic that had roots going back years. She saw fragments of how it had happened. A woman, beautiful and terrible, with red hair and eyes that gleamed with malice. Morgana, but younger, different somehow. And beside her, a man Isla recognized as the king in his human form, though he looked different here too. Softer, less guarded. Should never have trusted. The betrayal had come during a full moon ritual, a sacred ceremony meant to strengthen the bond between the king and his people. But Morgana had twisted it, corrupted it, using his own power against him. Isla saw the moment when the transformation began, when Kale had shifted to his wolf form and then found himself unable to shift back. Saw the horror in his eyes as he realized what had been done to him. Saw the years that followed, years of isolation and futility, of trying everything to break the curse while his kingdom whispered that he had become a monster. But beneath all that pain and rage and despair, Isla felt something else. A core of goodness that the curse had not touched, could not touch. Kale was still in there, still fighting, still hoping even when hope seemed like the cruelest joke of all. "I see you," Isla whispered, her hand still resting on his fur, tears streaming down her cheeks though she barely noticed them. "I see who you really are. And you are not a monster. You never were." The wolf Kale made a sound that broke her heart. A whine, raw and vulnerable, the sound of someone who had been alone for so long that kindness felt like a physical blow. Isla felt something shift in her chest, that sleeping part of herself stirring more strongly now. "We will find a way to break this," she promised, not knowing where the certainty came from, but feeling it bone deep nonetheless. "I do not know how yet, but we will find a way. You do. Not have to be alone anymore." Kale's golden eyes closed for just a moment, and through their bond, Isla felt gratitude so profound it made her want to weep. When he opened them again, there was something new there. Determination. And perhaps the first fragile shoots of trust. They spent hours together that night, Isla curled up against Kale's massive form as he lay on the floor beside the fire. She talked to him, telling him stories about her life in Silverpine, about growing up without her mother, about the loneliness of being different from everyone around her. And though he could not answer in words, she felt his responses through their bond. Understanding, sympathy, a shared recognition of what it meant to be isolated even in the middle of a crowd. At some point, exhaustion claimed her, and Isla drifted off to sleep with her head pillowed on Kale's soft fur, feeling safer than she had in her entire life. She woke to find herself back in her own bed in the rose chamber, with no clear memory of how she had gotten there. For a moment she wondered if it had all been a dream. But then she noticed the black wolf hair clinging to her robe, and felt the warmth of the bond still glowing in her chest. And she knew it had been real. That day, when Lady Morgana came for her morning interrogation, Isla studied the woman with new eyes. She looked older than in the visions Isla had seen, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her face more lined. But it was the same person. The same woman who had betrayed her king and cursed him to this half-life. "You are staring," Lady Morgana said coldly. "Have you forgotten your manners along with your common sense?" Isla bit back the angry accusations that wanted to pour forth. She could not reveal what she knew, not yet. Not until she understood more about the curse and how to break it. Confronting Morgana now would only put her in more danger. "I apologize," Isla said instead, lowering her eyes in a show of submission that made her skin crawl. "I did not mean to be rude." Morgana studied her for a long moment, suspicion evident in her ice-blue eyes. "You seem different this morning," she observed. "More settled, less frightened. Why is that?" Isla shrugged, trying to appear casual. "I suppose I am adjusting to my new circumstances. It has been nearly a week. Even the strangest situations start to feel normal eventually." It was a weak explanation, but Morgana seemed to accept it. Or perhaps she simply did not care enough to push further. "His Majesty has requested your presence in the throne room this afternoon," the advisor said, her tone making it clear how much this displeased her. "You will be escorted there at the appointed hour. Do not presume that this means you have any special status. You are here on sufferance, nothing more." But Isla could see the lie in Morgana's tight expression, could hear the thread of worry beneath her haughty words. The advisor was afraid of what Isla might represent, what her connection to Kale might mean for the carefully constructed power structure Morgana had built during the years of Kale's curse. Good, Isla thought with a fierce satisfaction that surprised her. Let her be afraid. That afternoon, Isla was led to the throne room by a pair of stern-faced guards who watched her as if she might sprout wings and fly away at any moment. When the doors opened, she found the space transformed. Where before it had been dim and cold, now sunlight streamed through the high windows, and braziers had been lit throughout the room, filling it with warmth and dancing light. And in the center of it all, lying before his throne in a pose of regal ease, was Kale. Their eyes met across the distance, and Isla felt the bond flare to life between them, a rush of warmth and welcome that made her smile despite the formality of the setting. She walked forward, conscious of the guards behind her, of the courtiers and advisors lining the walls of the EO room, all watching with barely concealed curiosity. What do you think will happen next? Leave your predictions in the comments below. When she reached the base of the dais, Isla sank into a curtsy, more for show than from any real sense of deference. When she rose, Kale had moved, descending from the dais to stand directly before her. He was even more impressive in the full light, his black fur gleaming like silk, his golden eyes bright and alert. Without hesitation, without fear, Isla reached out and placed her hand on his head, right between his ears. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled court, but Isla ignored it. Through their bond, she could feel Kale's amusement and approval. He liked that she was not afraid of him, that she treated him as an equal, rather than a monster to be feared. Morgana stepped forward from where she had been standing near the throne, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice tight. "Surely this is highly irregular. This girl should not be permitted such familiarity." Kale turned his head to look at his advisor, and even Isla, who could feel his emotions through their bond, was struck by the sheer commanding presence he radiated. The wolf might not be able to speak, but his body language spoke volumes. This was his choice, his decision, and Morgana would respect it or face the consequences. The advisor fell silent, though her eyes when they met Isla's were filled with such venom that Isla had to suppress a shiver. She had made an enemy, that much was clear. But she had also gained something far more valuable. An ally. A connection. Perhaps in time something even more than that. Kale gestured with his massive head, a clear indication that Isla should follow him. He led her from the throne room, through corridors she had not yet explored, until they reached a set of doors that opened onto a vast library. Isla gasped in wonder. She had never seen so many books in one place. They lined the walls from floor to ceiling, thousands upon thousands of volumes, their leather spines gleaming in the light from tall windows. Tables and comfortable chairs were scattered throughout the space, and a fire burned merrily in yet another massive fireplace. Kale padded to one of the tables, where Isla noticed a stack of books had already been laid out. He nosed at them, then looked at her expectantly. Isla moved closer, examining the titles. They were all about curses, about dark magic, about the histories of ancient bloodlines and forgotten rituals. "You want me to research," Isla said, understanding dawning. "You want me to help you find a way to break the curse." Kale's tail swished once, a clear affirmation. Isla felt tears prick her eyes. He was trusting her with this, sharing his desperate hope that somewhere in all these books might be the answer he had been seeking for years. "I will," she promised, running her hand along his back, marveling at the sleek strength she could feel beneath the fur. "I will read every single one of these books if I have to. We will find a way." And so began a new phase of Isla's time in the Northern Kingdom. Her days fell into a rhythm of reading and research, with Kale often lying beside her as she worked, his presence both comforting and motivating. She learned that he could understand written words, and she took to reading aloud to him, discussing theories and possibilities as if they were having a normal conversation. Through their bond, she could feel his responses, his agreement or skepticism, his growing hope that maybe, finally, someone might be able to help him. The nights were different. Kyle would call to her through their bond, and Isla would slip through the shadows to his chambers, where they would curl up together, sharing warmth and companionship in the lonely hours of darkness. She learned the rhythm of his breathing, the way his ears would flick when he was amused by something she said, the warmth of his presence in her mind when they let their connection deepen. It should have been strange, this intimacy with someone trapped in wolf form, but it felt natural to Isla in a way nothing in her life ever had before. For the first time, she had found someone who saw her, truly saw her, and did not find her lacking. And she could feel, through their bond, that Kale felt the same. She was the first person in years who had looked at him and seen not a monster or a curse, but a man still fighting for his humanity. Weeks passed in this fashion, with Isla gradually earning small freedoms within the castle as the staff grew accustomed to her presence. She explored the grounds when the weather permitted, walked the ramparts looking out over the mountains, learned the names and faces of the guards and servants who slowly began to warm to her quiet friendliness. And through it all, Morgana watched with calculating eyes, her displeasure evident in every stiff movement, every cold word. Isla knew the hoe. Advisor was planning something, could feel it in the way Morgana looked at her, like a predator sizing up prey. But she was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived at the castle gates. She had found her strength, or perhaps it had been there all along, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. It was on a cold morning 6 weeks after her arrival that Isla made the discovery that would change everything. She had been reading through a particularly ancient tome, its pages yellowed and brittle, its text written in an archaic language that required careful translation. The chapter dealt with blood magic and ancestral bonds, topics that made Isla's skin crawl with their implications. But there, buried in a footnote, was a reference to the lunar lineage, a bloodline thought to have died out centuries ago. According to the text, those of the lunar lineage possessed abilities far beyond normal werewolves. They could heal fatal wounds, could speak mind to mind with any wolf, regardless of pack bonds, and most importantly, could undo curses woven with dark magic by channeling the power of the moon itself. The only catch was that their power remained dormant until awakened by true emotional connection, by a bond that went beyond the physical into the realm of the soul. Isla's hands trembled as she read the words again and again. Could it be? Could she possibly be descended from this legendary bloodline? It would explain so much. Why she had never shifted. Why she could connect with Kale when no one else could. Why that voice in her head had spoken of waiting. Her wolf had not been absent. It had been sleeping, waiting for the moment when it would be needed. Waiting for him. She had to tell Kale. She had to show him what she had found. Isla stood abruptly, clutching the book to her chest, and hurried from the library. She knew where he would be at this hour. He spent his mornings in the training yards, overseeing the guards' practice even if he could not. fight alongside them as he once had. But as Isla rushed through the corridors, her mind racing with possibilities, she nearly collided with Lady Morgana. The advisor stood blocking the hallway, her arms crossed, her expression colder than the mountain snow. "Going somewhere in such a hurry?" Morgana asked, her voice deceptively mild. Isla clutched the book tighter, some instinct warning her not to reveal what she had found. "I was just going to find His Majesty," she said carefully. "I have been researching," as he asked. "How dedicated of you," Morgana said, her tone making it clear she thought Isla was anything but. "Tell me, what could possibly be so important that you need to interrupt the king's duties?" Isla met her gaze steadily. "That is between His Majesty and myself." It was a bold statement, bordering on insolent. Morgana's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You forget your place, girl. You are here on sufferance. One word from me, and you will find yourself in the dungeons, or worse." "Then say the word," Isla challenged, surprised by her own courage. "But we both know you will not, because His Majesty has made it clear he wants me here. And even you do not dare defy him directly." The words hung in the air between them, a line drawn that could not be uncrossed. Morgana's face flushed with anger, her composure finally cracking. "You think you are so clever," she hissed. "You think you have won something by gaining a cursed beast's affection. But you know nothing. You, foolish child. That creature is not a king. He is an animal, and he will never be anything more. The man he was is gone, and no amount of wishful thinking will bring him back." Isla felt fury rise in her chest, hot and fierce. "You are wrong," she said quietly, but with absolute conviction. "He is more of a king in his current form than some rulers are in their human ones. He is kind and strong and honorable. And if you cannot see that, then perhaps you are the one who is truly cursed." Morgana's hand moved so fast Isla barely saw it coming. The slap cracked across her cheek, snapping her head to the side and bringing tears to her eyes. "How dare you?" Morgana breathed, her voice shaking with rage. "How dare you speak to me that way? I have served this kingdom for longer than you have been alive. I have kept it running when your precious king could not even hold court in his human form. I have sacrificed everything to maintain order, and I will not be lectured by some wolfless nobody who thinks she is special because a beast tolerates her presence." The sound of running footsteps interrupted whatever Isla might have said in response. A guard appeared around the corner, his face flushed with exertion. "Lady Morgana," he panted. "His Majesty requests your presence in the throne room immediately, and," he added, his eyes flicking to Isla, "he requests the Lady Isla as well." Morgana smoothed her expression, once again the picture of cold composure. "Of course," she said. "We will attend him at once." She swept past Isla without another glance, but Isla could feel the weight of her hatred like a physical thing pressing against her back. Isla followed more slowly, her cheek still stinging from the slap, her mind whirling. What did Cale want? Had he somehow sensed the confrontation through their bond? When they reached the throne room, Isla found it filled with courtiers and advisors, all looking nervous and uncertain. And at the center of it all, Cale stood in his wolf form, his posture radiating agitation. The moment Isla entered, his golden eyes found hers, and she felt a surge of concern through their bond. She hurried forward, ignoring the whispers that followed her movement. When she reached him, Kyle lowered his head, sniffing at her face, and she knew he could scent the salt of tears, could probably see the red mark on her cheek. A growl rumbled deep in his chest, and he turned to fix Morgana with a stare that promised consequences. "Your Majesty," Morgana began, her voice smooth despite the clear threat in Kyle's posture. "I assure you, whatever the girl has told you is exaggerated. We merely had a small disagreement about propriety and protocol." Isla placed her hand on Cale's head, trying to calm him through their bond. "It does not matter," she said softly. "Please, Let it go. But Kale was not so easily appeased. He moved away from Isla, stalking toward Morgana with slow, deliberate steps. The advisor held her ground, but Isla could see fear flash through her eyes. The wolf stopped mere inches from her, his massive head level with hers, his golden eyes boring into her with an intensity that made several courtiers step back nervously. Then, very deliberately, Kale turned his back on her. In pack hierarchy, it was one of the greatest insults possible. To turn your back on someone was to declare them beneath your notice, unworthy of even the respect due an enemy. The message was clear. Morgana had crossed a line, and there would be consequences. The advisor's face went white, then red, a mottled flush of humiliation and rage. But she could not protest, could not defend herself, without making things worse. She simply stood there, frozen, as Kale returned to Isla's side. "I found something," Isla said quietly, speaking to Kale but knowing everyone in the room could hear. "In my research. Something important. Something that might help." Kale's ears pricked forward, his full attention on her now. Through their bond, she felt his desperate hope mixed with fear of disappointment. If you want to see how this story ends, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. Isla opened the ancient tome she still carried, finding the page about the lunar lineage. "There is a bloodline," she began, reading aloud so everyone could hear. An ancient bloodline that was believed to have died out centuries ago. Those of this lineage possessed unique gifts, including the ability to break curses woven with dark magic. She looked up, meeting Kale's golden eyes. The text says their power remains dormant until awakened by a true soul bond, a connection that goes beyond pack loyalty or simple mate bonds, a recognition that transcends physical form. The throne room had gone completely silent. Every eye was on Isla, every ear straining to hear her words. "I think," Isla continued, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the hush, "I think I might be of this lineage. It would explain why I never shifted, why my wolf has been sleeping all these years. It was not absent. It was waiting for the moment when it would be needed." She took a deep breath, then spoke the words that would change everything. "Waiting for you." A ripple of shock ran through the assembled courtiers. Morgana made a sound of derision. "Impossible," she said sharply. "The lunar lineage is a myth, nothing more. And even if it were real, what makes you think you could possibly be connected to it? You are nobody." "Nothing. A wolfless failure from a minor pack." But Isla was not listening to Morgana anymore. She was focused entirely on Kyle, on the bond that thrummed between them, golden and warm and growing stronger with each passing moment. "I do not know if I am right," she said to him, ignoring everyone else in the room. "But I know what I felt when I first touched you. I know what I feel every time we connect. And I know that something inside me has been waking up since I came here. Something powerful. Something that recognizes you." She placed both hands on either side of his massive head, looking deep into those golden eyes. "Let me try. Let me see if I can break this curse. Even if I fail, even if nothing happens, at least we will know. At least we will have tried." For a long moment, Kale simply stared at her, and Isla could feel the war raging inside him through their bond. Hope warring with fear of disappointment. Desire for freedom warring with the terror of allowing himself to believe it might be possible. Finally, slowly, he nodded. A clear, deliberate gesture of consent and trust. Isla felt tears spring to her eyes. "Tonight," she said softly. "Tonight, when the moon is full and high, we will go to the sacred circle, and I will try to call forth whatever power sleeps inside me. I will try to bring you back." The throne room erupted into chaos. Courtiers talking over each other, guards looking uncertain, advisors protesting that this was madness. But through it all, Morgana's voice cut clearest. "This is folly," she declared, her voice ringing with authority. "Your Majesty, I beg you to reconsider. The sacred circle has not been used since the night of your curse. To attempt this ritual with an untrained, unproven girl is to court disaster." Kyle turned to face his advisor, and even in his wolf form, his displeasure was evident. He stalked back to his throne, leaping up onto the dais with effortless grace despite his massive size. Then he did something Isla had never seen him do before. He sat upon the throne itself, his posture regal and commanding, every inch the king he had been born to be. The message was clear. He had made his decision. The matter was closed. Morgana's jaw clenched, her hands fisting at her sides. But she could do nothing but bow her head in acknowledgement, even as fury radiated from every line of her body. "As you wish, Your Majesty," she said through gritted teeth. "I will make the necessary preparations." As the courtiers slowly dispersed, still whispering among themselves, Isla remained standing before the throne, her eyes locked with Kale's. Through their bond, she felt his gratitude, his trust, his desperate, fragile hope that maybe, finally, his nightmare might end. And beneath all of that, she felt something else. Something warm and tender and profound. He cared for her. Not just as someone who might free him, but as a person. As Isla. As the woman who had looked at a cursed beast and seen a king. The feeling was mutual. Somewhere over the past weeks, without quite realizing it was happening, Isla had fallen in love with him. With his strength and his kindness. With the way he made her feel safe and valued and seen. With the man she could sense beneath the curse, waiting to be freed. Tonight, she would either save him or fail spectacularly. But either way, she would give everything she had to try. Because he was worth it. Because they were worth it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Isla was taken to a chamber where attendants bathed her in water infused with herbs, braided moonflowers into her hair, and dressed her in a gown of pure white that seemed to shimmer in the light. Through it all, she could feel Kale through their bond, a constant presence that both calmed and energized her. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of fire, Isla was led to the sacred circle. It was located in a clearing high on the mountain, ringed by standing stones that hummed with ancient power. The stones were carved with symbols Isla did not recognize, words in a language older than memory. And in the center of the circle, a flat altar stone caught the last rays of sunlight, gleaming like polished silver. Kyle was already there, lying before the altar in a pose of submission that looked wrong on such a powerful creature. But Isla understood. He was placing himself completely in her hands, trusting her with his life, his soul, his hope. The assembled court stood outside the circle of stones, watching in silence as Isla entered the sacred space. The moment she crossed the threshold, she felt it. Power. Old and deep and patient. Thrumming up through the stone beneath her feet, singing in her blood. Her wolf, dormant for so long, stirred fully awake for the first time. Isla walked to where Kale lay, her white gown trailing across the ground, leaving patterns in the thin layer of snow that covered the clearing. She knelt beside him, placing her hands on his dark fur, and opened herself completely to their bond. The connection blazed to life between them, stronger than ever before, a golden cord that tied soul to soul. "I need you to shift," Isla whispered, not knowing how she knew this, but certain it was true. "You need to try to take your human form, and when you cannot, when the curse tries to hold you in this shape, I will break it. We will break it together." Kale's eyes met hers, and she felt his fear. It had been 5 years since he last attempted to shift. 5 years of being trapped, of forgetting what it felt like to stand on 2 legs, to speak with a human voice. What if it had been too long? What if even breaking the curse could not restore what he had lost? "Trust me," Isla said softly, her hands moving to cup his massive head, her forehead pressing against his. "Trust us. Trust what we have built together." The moon rose over the mountain peaks, full and bright, bathing the sacred circle in silver light. Isla felt power surge through her, power she had never known she possessed. The standing stones began to glow, their ancient markings pulsing with light. And in her mind, clear as a bell, she heard a voice. Her wolf, her own voice, but different somehow. Older, wiser, ready. "Now," Isla breathed. Kyle's body began to shimmer, to shift, bones beginning to crack and reform in the familiar agony of transformation. But then the curse activated, dark magic rising like black smoke from his fur, wrapping around him, forcing him to remain in his wolf form. Isla could feel it, could see it with senses she had not possessed before this moment. The curse was intricate, layered, designed to be unbreakable. But it had one flaw. It assumed Kale would always be alone. It never accounted for a bond like theirs. Isla closed her eyes and reached deep inside herself, to the place where her wolf waited. She felt her own body begin to shift for the first time in her life, felt bones lengthen and reshape, felt fur sprouting along her skin. But this shift was different from normal werewolf transformations. Power poured through her, lunar energy channeled by bloodline and bond, and when her eyes opened, they glowed with pure silver light. She was not fully wolf, not fully human, but something in between. Something ancient and powerful and terrifying. And she was magnificent. Isla threw back her head and howled, a sound that shook the very stones, that rang out across the mountains and valleys, calling to every wolf within 100 miles. And as she howled, she poured everything she had into the bond she shared with Kale. All her love, all her trust, all her absolute conviction that he was meant to be more than this curse had made him. The dark magic surrounding Kyle shattered like glass. The curse, maintained for 5 years through Morgana's continuous spellwork and dark sacrifices, broke apart under the onslaught of Isla's lunar power. Kyle's transformation completed in a rush. Bones cracking, form shifting, until suddenly, impossibly, a man knelt where the wolf had been. He was beautiful. Dark hair fell to his shoulders, streaked with silver at the temples. His body was powerfully built, marked with scars that told stories of battles fought and survived. And his eyes were the same molten gold, burning with emotion as they met hers. "Isla," he breathed, his voice rough from disuse but deeper and richer than she had imagined. "You did it. You actually did it." Shifted
Isla.
back to her human form, the transformation coming as naturally as breathing, now that her wolf had finally awakened. She was trembling, exhausted from the power she had channeled, but she had never felt more alive. "We did it," she corrected, reaching for him. Kale caught her hands, pulling her close, and Isla finally got to touch him as he truly was. His skin was warm, his grip strong but gentle. His scent wrapped around her, pine and earth and something uniquely him. "I have wanted to hold you like this," Kale said softly, his arms coming around her. "Since the moment you first touched me. Since you looked at a monster and saw a man." "You were never a monster," Isla insisted, her hands coming up to frame his face, marveling at the sharp planes of his cheekbones, the strength of his jaw. "You were always a king, always yourself. The curse could not change that." Kale smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, lighter, free in a way he had not been in years. "My mate," he murmured, his forehead coming to rest against hers. "My true mate. Not chosen by politics or strategy, but by fate itself, by the connection between our souls." Isla felt tears stream down her face, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of overwhelming happiness. "Your mate?" she agreed. "If you will have me. If you want this, want us." Cale's answer was to kiss her. It was soft at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he was too bold. Him with equal passion, Isla meant, equal joy, pouring everything she felt into that kiss. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, the assembled court erupted into cheers. Guards banged their weapons against their shields in celebration. Courtiers applauded, and even the servants who had gathered to watch were smiling and wiping away tears. But not everyone was celebrating. Morgana stood at the edge of the clearing, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. As Isla watched, the advisor turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness beyond the sacred circle. "She will try to stop us," Isla said quietly, watching the woman go. "She put that curse on you, did she not? I saw it, in the visions when we first connected. She will not accept that it has been broken." Cale's expression hardened, his arm tightening around Isla's waist protectively. "Let her try," he said, his voice carrying the steel of command that marked him as a true king. "She has held power here for too long, used my curse, to advance her own position. But that ends tonight. Tonight, everything changes." He turned to address the assembled crowd, his voice ringing out clear and strong. "My people," he called. "For 5 years you have endured a cursed king, a ruler who could not even show you his face. You remained loyal when you had every right to abandon me, to choose a new leader. Your faith will not be forgotten." He paused, looking down at Isla with such warmth in his eyes that she felt her heart might burst. "This woman, Isla of Silverpine, is not just my savior. She is my true mate, recognized by the oldest magic, blessed by the moon herself. And when we hold the mating ceremony, she will become your queen. Will you accept her? Will you welcome her as one of your own?" The roar of approval that answered him shook the mountain itself. The northern pack, it seemed, was more than ready to embrace the woman who had freed their king. The celebration that followed lasted 3 days. The castle, so cold and forbidding when Isla had first arrived, came alive with music and laughter and joy. Cale barely left her side, as if afraid that if he let her out of his sight she might vanish like a dream. They talked for hours, making up for lost time, learning each other's stories in words rather than feelings transmitted through a bond. Isla learned that Cale had been barely 25 when the curse struck, that he had only been king for 2 years before Morgana's betrayal. She learned about his parents, killed in a border skirmish that had elevated him to the throne before he felt ready. She learned about his hopes for his kingdom, his dreams of peace with neighboring territories, his desire to be a ruler his people could be proud of. And Cale learned about Isla's lonely childhood, about growing up without her mother, about the pain of being seen as broken by everyone she knew. He learned about her love of reading, her quiet strength, the way she had survived years of rejection without letting it harden her heart. On the 3rd night of celebration, as the moon rose full and bright once more, Cale led Isla back to the sacred circle for their mating ceremony. This time, the clearing was decorated with thousands of moonflowers, their white petals glowing in the moonlight. Torches ringed the standing stones, and the entire pack had gathered to witness the ritual. The ceremony was beautiful and ancient, conducted by the pack's eldest shaman in words that predated the kingdom itself. Isla and Cale stood hand in hand in the center of the circle, their eyes locked on each other, as the shaman bound their wrists together with a silver cord and called upon the moon to bless their union. When it came time for the claiming marks, the ultimate symbol of a mated pair, Cale cupped Isla's face gently in his hands. "Are you certain?" he asked softly, his eyes searching hers. "Once this is done, it cannot be undone. You will be tied to me, to this kingdom, for the rest of your life. If you have any doubts, Isla silenced him with a kiss. "I have never been more certain of anything," she said when they parted. "You are my mate, Kale. You have been since the moment I touched you and our souls recognized each other. Mark me. Make it official for everyone to see." Kale's eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising to the surface. He lowered his head to the curve of her neck, his teeth extending. The bite, when it came, was sharp and quick, a flash of pain that transformed immediately into pleasure, and a sense of rightness so profound it stole Ila's breath. She felt their bond solidify, become permanent, a golden thread that would connect them for the rest of their lives and beyond. When it was her turn, Isla called forth her wolf for just a moment, let her teeth extend, and returned the mark on Kyle's neck. The moment her teeth broke his skin, she felt his love and devotion pour through their bond, felt the absolute certainty of his commitment to her. The shaman raised their joined hands high. "By the power of the moon, by the ancient laws of our people, by the blessing of fate itself, I declare you mated. King Kale and Queen Isla, may your bond be eternal, your love unbreakable, your reign long and prosperous." The pack erupted into howls of joy, the sound rising into the night sky, a primal celebration of new beginnings. Kale pulled Isla into his arms, kissing her deeply as moonlight bathed them both in silver radiance. But even in the midst of such joy, Isla felt a shadow at the edge of her awareness. Morgana had not been seen since the night the curse was broken. She had vanished from the castle, taking with her several loyal followers and, according to the guards, several dangerous magical artifacts from the royal vault. "She will come back," Isla murmured against Kale's chest as they danced later that night, swaying to music played by the pack's musicians. "She will not accept this. Will not accept me." Kale's arms tightened around her. "Let her come," he said quietly. "She no longer has power over me. And if she threatens you, if she threatens our people, I will end her. I should have done it years ago, but I was weak, trapped, unable to act. I am not weak anymore." Isla pulled back enough to look up at him. "You were never weak," she insisted. "Cursed, yes. Trapped, yes. But never weak. It took incredible strength to survive what you did, to hold on to your humanity when everything was pushing you to give in to despair." Kale smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "I almost did give in," he admitted, "more times than I can count. But then you arrived, small and fierce and refusing to be afraid of me. You gave me hope when I had forgotten what hope felt like." They danced in silence for a while, content just to be close, to feel the solid reality of each other after so much uncertainty. Finally, as the celebration began to wind down and pack members started drifting away to their homes, Kale led Isla back to his chambers. The room looked different now, warm and welcoming instead of cold and isolated. A fire burned merrily in the enormous fireplace, and the bed had been prepared with fresh linens and soft furs. "I want to show you something," Kale said, moving to a chest in the corner of the room. He opened it and withdrew a small portrait in a silver frame. "This was painted the year before my parents died, before I became king, before everything changed." Isla took the portrait carefully, studying the image. It showed a young man, barely more than a boy really, with dark hair and golden eyes, and a smile that lit up his whole face. Beside him stood a man and woman who could only be his parents, both of them looking at their son with obvious pride and love. "You look happy," Isla said softly. "So carefree." Kyle nodded. "I was. I had no idea what was coming. No concept of the weight that would soon rest on my shoulders. Some days I miss that innocence, that certainty that the world was a fundamentally good place where bad things only happened to other people." He took the portrait back, setting it carefully on a table beside the bed. "But if I could go back and change things, prevent my parents' death and the curse and all the pain of the last 5 years, I would not. Because all of that brought me to you. And you, Isla, are worth every moment of suffering it took to find you. Isla felt tears spring to her eyes. I love you, she said, the words coming easily now that they were mated, now that there was nothing to hide or hold back. I love you so much it terrifies me. I did not know I was capable of feeling this way. Cale cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. I love you too, he said. You are my miracle, my salvation, my mate, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt how precious you are to me. They came together then, passion and tenderness mingling as they claimed each other fully for the first time. Cale was gentle but intense, worshipping every inch of her skin as if she was something sacred. Isla met him with equal fervor, marveling at the solid reality of him, the warmth of his skin against hers, the strength in his arms as he held her close. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the massive bed, Isla's head pillowed on Cale's chest, his fingers trailing lazily through her hair. Through their bond, she could feel his contentment, his peace, the deep satisfaction of having his mate in his arms at last. What happens now? Isla asked sleepily. With the kingdom? With Morgana? With everything? Kyle was quiet for a moment, his hand stilling in her hair. Now, he said finally, we rebuild. I have been absent as a leader for too long, leaving too much power in Morgana's hands. There will be work to do, alliances to repair, trust to rebuild with my people, and there will be threats to face. Morgana is not the only danger lurking in the shadows. He paused, then continued more softly. But we will face it all together, you and I, side by side, king and queen, mates, partners in all things. Isla smiled against his chest. Together, she echoed. I like the sound of that. They drifted off to sleep as the moon began to set, two souls finally whole after lifetimes of searching. But even in sleep, they remained connected, their bond a constant reminder that neither of them would ever be alone again. The months that followed were both challenging and joyful. Cale threw himself into the work of ruling, determined to be the king his people deserved. He met with advisors and foreign dignitaries, settled disputes, and worked to strengthen the kingdom's defenses and economy. And through it all, Isla was by his side. She proved to be a natural at diplomacy, her gentle manner and genuine interest in people making her popular with both the common folk and the nobility. She established schools for children throughout the kingdom, opened the castle's library to scholars, and began programs to help the most vulnerable members of their society. But they also faced challenges. 3 months after the curse was broken, Morgana made her move. She returned with a small army of mercenaries and dark magic users, laying siege to the castle in an attempt to reclaim what she saw as her rightful place, as the power behind the throne. The battle was fierce and bloody. Morgana had spent years gathering power, collecting dark artifacts, and studying forbidden magic. She was a formidable enemy, and there were moments when it seemed she might actually win. But she had underestimated 2 things. First, the loyalty of the Northern Pack to their true king. The people remembered Cale as he had been before the curse, remembered his kindness and his strength. And they loved Isla, their miracle queen who had freed their king when everyone else had given up hope. They fought with the ferocity of those defending not just their home, but their family. And second, Morgana had underestimated the power of the bond between Cale and Isla. When Morgana tried to curse Cale again, attempting to force him back into his wolf form permanently, Isla was there. She channeled her lunar power through their mate bond, using it to shield Cale from the dark magic, to turn Morgana's own spell back on her. The former advisor fell, her own curse consuming her, transforming her into a twisted shadow creature that fled into the mountains, never to be seen again. In the aftermath of the battle, as they stood on the ramparts looking out over their kingdom, Cale pulled Isla into his arms. You saved me again, he said softly. I am beginning to make a habit of it, Isla replied with a tired smile. Try not to need saving quite so often. Kale laughed, the sound warm and genuine. I will do my best. Though I make no promises. You bring out the reckless in me. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun rise over the mountains. So much had changed since that first day when Isla had arrived as a sacrifice, a throwaway daughter sent to appease a monster. Now she was a queen, powerful in her own right, loved by her people and her mate. Do you ever miss it? Kale asked. Your old pack? Your father? The life you left behind? Isla thought about it for a long moment. Sometimes, she admitted. I miss the familiarity of it, even if that familiarity came with pain. But I do not regret leaving. How could I? That life was never truly mine. This one is. Her hand coming to rest over her stomach where a tiny life had just begun to grow, though she had not told him yet. Soon, she thought. Soon she would share the news that they were going to have a child, a heir to continue their legacy. This is where I belong, Isla said firmly. Here, with you, building something better than what we left behind. Creating a kingdom where children do not grow up feeling worthless because they are different, where power comes from love and loyalty rather than fear and manipulation. Kale kissed the top of her head. And we will build it together, he promised. Every day, every decision, together. A year passed, then 2. Isla gave birth to a daughter with Kale's golden eyes and her own silver-streaked hair. A little girl who could shift between wolf and human form even as an infant, her lunar bloodline strong and true. They named her Elena, after the mother Isla had never known. The kingdom prospered under their joint rule. Trade increased, alliances strengthened, and the northern pack became known not for their fearsome king, but for their wise and just rulers who governed with both strength and compassion. Isla never forgot where she came from, never forgot the girl she had been before arriving at these mountain gates. And she used that memory to ensure that in her kingdom, no one would ever be discarded as she had been. Every child was valued, every person given the chance to find their place and their purpose. On the 5th anniversary of the day she had broken Kale's curse, Isla stood once again in the sacred circle. The standing stones hummed with power as they always did under the full moon, and around her stood her family, her pack, her people. Kale held little Elena in his arms, their daughter babbling happily and reaching for the moonlight as if she could catch it in her tiny hands. Beside them stood 2 more children, twin boys born just a year ago, their eyes already showing hints of gold. Make your wish, love, Kylie said softly, nodding toward the altar stone, where tradition said wishes made under the full moon would be heard by fate itself. Isla closed her eyes, but no wish came to mind. What could she ask for that she did not already have? A mate who loved her, children who thrived, a kingdom at peace, purpose and belonging and acceptance she had never dreamed possible. Instead of a wish, she made a promise. To never take this happiness for granted, to fight for it every day, to be worthy of the miracle that had transformed her from a rejected daughter into a beloved queen. When she opened her eyes, Kale was watching her with that same expression he had worn the first night they truly connected, when he had knelt before her in his wolf form. Love and wonder and gratitude all mingled together. No wish? He asked. Isla shook her head, moving to stand beside him, placing her hand gently on their daughter's head. I have everything I need, she said simply. Right here. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who loves epic romance. Tell me in the comments, did you see this ending coming? The moon rose higher, bathing the sacred circle in silver light as the royal family stood together, their bond unbreakable, their future bright with possibility. And if sometimes, late at night, Isla still felt that golden thread connecting her to Kale, still marveled at the miracle of their connection. She kept it as a private joy, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope could survive. That even when the world told you that you were worthless, fate might have other plans. That sometimes, the beast you feared might become the love you needed. And that true power came not from shifting into a wolf or commanding armies, but from the courage to be vulnerable, to trust, to love with your whole heart, even when it terrified you. In the end, Isla had not just broken a curse. She had broken the chains of her own self-doubt, had found the strength that had been sleeping inside her all along. And in doing so, she had not just saved a king, she had saved herself. As the celebration began and music filled the mountain air, Cal leaned down to whisper in her ear. "Thank you," he said softly, "for seeing me when I could not see myself, for believing when I had given up hope, for being exactly who you are." Isla turned in his arms, raising up on her toes to kiss him softly. "Thank you for kneeling," she whispered back, "for trusting me with your curse, your kingdom, for being my home when I had never truly had one before." And there, under the light of the full moon, surrounded by their children and their people, the beast of the north and the girl who had tamed him danced, their hearts beating in perfect synchrony, their souls forever entwined.